G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. The video about this American militarism. Last night I made a long comment on the thread under a video by Phoenix Chastain where she was talking about pacifism, and she mentioned that she never heard about the land of the morning Khan, which was a pacifist kingdom that lasted for 1,000 years in Korea. She didn't learn about that till she was in the military, looking at a little orientation book on how to go to Korea without annoying the locals. And she mentioned that nobody ever teaches that to the American schools. And she mentioned that it's perfectly normal over there to grow up around guns. And she wondered if pacifists just didn't understand how deeply woven into the American society militarism has become. And yeah, well, actually, I have got a bit of an understanding of that. So let's run over a few of the high points, will we? As I understand it, following the American Civil War, there was a deep distaste for warriorism in America, as long as warriorism was defined as a fair fight among people with modern technological weapons. There was plenty of appetite for running around with a technological advantage and taking land from natives and exterminating whole peoples. That was okay because that led to economic expansion of the European based civilization that had rooted itself in the American continent. But there was not much appetite for going off and having a fair fight with somebody whose guns were as good as the American military was. And then by 1914, most of the Civil War veterans were dead. The people who remembered the full horror of war weren't in a position to speak about it because they were busy pushing up daisies. The Europeans had a great appetite for arms and munitions. So the Europeans lent the American business community the finance to construct munitions factories. And they gave them contracts, which meant that within 2 years of opening your production line up, you paid off the loan and you then had a beautiful, great big factory that was good for making bombs or guns or bullets or explosives or tanks or engines or gearboxes or tyres or wheels or whatever it was that you felt like selling to the European military. The Americans were pretty horrible at making aeroplanes at that point in time because the Wright brothers had a patent on wing warping, and anybody who tried to build anything that flew with roll control went to court with the Wright brothers and they got tied up for years. However, it meant that in order to expand, it was deemed necessary for America to enter the war. And at the time, 1916, the factories were paid for. But you see, 55% of the American population were deeply isolationist. They wanted to stay out of the European war. I think 25% wanted to fight on the side of England, 15% wanted to fight on the side of Germany, and there were some undecideds. So there was a US government funded Madison Avenue advertising campaign. It took 6 months and it reversed that 55-25 so that 55% of America wanted to fight on the side of England and France, and only 25% wanted to stay isolationist. And there was still 15% who wanted to fight on the side of Germany. So off to war against Germany, the United States declared itself. But they turned up so late that most of the shooting was actually over by the time America got any soldiers trained and onto the ground. And I think the figures, and I'm going to give an aeronautical example here, the figures would go that by the time Pershing got his army over there and they actually shot at the Germans, and some of them did shoot at the Germans and they fought very hard and they did very well, and there was a lost battalion and all kinds of things happened. But for every Eddie Rickenbacker or Raoul Loughbury or Frank Luke who actually swapped hot lead with the Germans, there were probably 10 Waldo Peppers who were in training and they deeply wished that they had arrived at the front in time to do some fighting. And for every 10 Waldo Peppers, there were 100 Walter Mitties who stayed at home in America and dreamed that they were war heroes. So the isolationist forces sort of grew up again for a while, and then World War II came along, and then we are led to believe that the Americans who lived through World War II were, quote, the greatest generation because they stopped Nazism and they stopped Japanese expansion and they did everything that was ever worth doing, was the greatest generation of Americans. So let's have a little bit of a look at what the history book has to say about what really happened in World War II. You know, who suffered how much and who won what. Let us have a book reading from War Without Glory. The world had come through conflict that had taken, it was said, 54 million lives, nearly 4 times the population of Australia today. 15 million men had died on the battlefields, 39 million people in the towns and cities, 6 million of them had been Jews murdered by the Nazis. Russia had suffered most in the German onslaught and afterwards, 20 million dead, 7 million of them civilians. China had lost 5 million soldiers and various estimates of civilians up to 10 million. Nearly 4 million German soldiers had died and 2,300,000 German people at home. 170,000 German Jews were murdered. Japan suffered 1,140,000 men killed in action and 668,000 people in raids on its home islands, while another 240,000 Japanese were missing. The toll went on in that manner nation by nation, scaling down with their size or the fortunes of their situations. Australia lost 30,000 military personnel, that's dead and missing, 26,000 into captivity. Britain paid with 271,000 military lives and those of 61,000 civilians. The United States with 292,000 servicemen. The war had cost the world $1,600 billion. The bloke who wrote that was born in 1912, educated at Scotch College in Melbourne and Melbourne University. He held a pilot's licence from 1934 to 1952. Before World War II, he was a journalist with the Argus and the Sydney Morning Herald newspapers. So when he says $1,600 billion, is he talking American billions or is he talking British billions? If he was talking US billions, then we're talking $29,629.62 worth of industrial activity generated by the death of each one of the 54 million people who was killed worldwide during the Second World War. If Balfe was talking British billions, I don't think he was, it would have been $296,296.292, right? Because British billions are 1,000,000 million and American billions are only 1,000 million. But to hold up against that as a yardstick, during the Vietnam War, the Pentagon spent $1 million US, 1963 to 73 US dollars that is, to kill every Viet Cong or North Vietnamese Army regular person that they actually killed. $1 million at per each. If you spool that forward to the Arab Intifada, when the Israelis were spending $12.5 million per week to occupy Lebanon, and they were killing one Arab a week, $12.5 million $1982 for the military to kill one enemy. $1 million to kill one enemy in, say, 1968, 70. Allowing for inflation, I really think we're talking $29,629 for each of the 54 million people killed during the Second World War. It's a lot of industrial activity when you consider how efficiently the Germans killed the Russians and how they made a profit on the 6 million Jews that they killed in their concentration camps. But that's your figures. Nearly $30,000 worth of industrial activity generated for everybody who died. Now here we have a bit of a fudge factor because I'm really kind of guessing the population of the USSR at 220 million, China at 300 million. Let's say that there were, 10 million Jews in Europe, 56 million Germans, 65 million Japanese. They used to call themselves 100 million, but they didn't actually have 100 million of them there. 36 million, maybe 38 million in Britain. I'm calling it 36. Australia, 6.5 million. And America, 150 million. Total killed. In Russia, 20 million out of 220 million. That's one dead for every 11 people in the Soviet Union. China, 15 million killed out of 300 million. One killed for every 20 people. The European Jews, if there was 10 million of them and 6 million were killed, that's 1 for every 1.6 people. The Germans, 56 million of them, and 6.3 million of them died, 4 million being soldiers and 2.3 million being civilians. That's 1 for every 8.6 Germans was killed during the Second World War. 1 in 8 of them were killed in the war. In Japan, with 65 million, and they only lost 2.048 million, it's 1 dead for every 31.7 Japanese. The British, 36 million people and 332,000 killed, is 1 dead for every 108.4. In Australia, 1 dead for every 216.6. If you add Australia's prisoners of war and missing in actions into that, it's 1 for every 116.07 people in the country was killed, missing, or captured. The USA, the greatest generation, the ones who pat themselves on the back for having won World War II, they did it all. It was America. 150 million of them, 292,000 of them died. There might have been 2,000 civilians at Pearl Harbor, but maybe it was less than that. I think the Japanese spent most of their time actually attacking military installations. They didn't spend much time bombing the suburbs. There was 1 American killed by a Japanese balloon bomb on the west coast, carried there by the jet stream. So what we have is 1 American killed for every 513.69 Americans living at the time. So Australia suffered nearly 3 times more than America. Britain suffered 5 times more than America. What did Japan suffer? 513 divided by 31. Japan suffered 16.5 times more than America. The Germans suffered 60 times more than America on a per capita basis for participating in World War II. The European Jews suffered 320 times as much as the Americans suffered on a per capita basis. Chinese suffered 25 times more than the Americans, and the United Soviet Socialist Republics suffered 46 times the number of people killed for the number of the people in the country compared to America. The United States of America risked the least, suffered the least, and gained the most during World War II. Now, what would Macchiavelli say? If you want to figure out who did something mysterious, figure out who gained the most, who profited the most, and that'll point to who caused it to happen. Scary thought, isn't it? And what seems to be even more scary is that ever since the American military-industrial complex, of which Eisenhower warned the world when he stepped down at the end of his presidency, it's been attempting to drag the world into another war in the hope that it will be as profitable as the previous one was. They're trying to rerun World War II for the benefit of the munitions factories in the excited states of Norte Armed Americano. So that's cheerful, isn't it? Could be why when I was a kid, 6 years old, I received a camouflage tiger suit combat clothing tailored for a 6-year-old with a plastic M16 with a grenade launcher underneath it and a plastic child-sized US combat helmet. And I guess I'd have to say that until the first time I jumped out of the apple tree and my plastic M16 broke in half, I was a true believer in the whole American militaristic, warrioristic, Australia lapdog ANZUS theory. But as I grew older, as I discovered stuff like this, I formed a different opinion. Now I know that war is really only good for making money for the armaments manufacturers and for culling warrior DNA from the human gene pool. Because after they've been in combat, their kids die off faster than the children of normal people. I almost wish that somebody would get up a class action and sue the recruiters for failing to inform the people that they are trying to enlist. Perhaps if the government was made to pay out for incitement to join the military by withholding information. It might change things. Funny thing is that ever since the American Civil War, no nation which has embarked on a war voluntarily has ever achieved their pre-war aims and their intentions and their goals, the pursuit of which caused them to enter the war. If you think World War II ended Nazism, and what the hell's the United Kingdom Independence Party doing now? Warbles on a lot to YouTube? Ciao.